Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the cold window of the research station and watched the stars flicker in the darkness. The station called Horizon's Edge had been floating in space for many years, and its metal walls were covered with small holes from space rocks. Behind her, the big communication machine made humming sounds as it tried to send messages across the galaxy. Lieutenant Marcus Kane looked up from his screen with worry in his eyes. His voice shook when he spoke to Elena. The Galactic Council was not answering their calls for help. Yesterday, the alien army called the Drakari had destroyed 3 whole planets where people lived. Now, they were moving toward the center of the galaxy where the most important worlds were located. Elena turned away from the window and walked to the main control panel where red lights were blinking like angry eyes. The Drakari were different from any enemy the galaxy had ever seen before. They were like a giant hive of insects that worked together with one mind. They ate entire worlds and left nothing behind except empty rocks floating in space. Their ships moved like living creatures and could change themselves to fight against any weapon that was used against them. Marcus told Elena about the restricted communication channels that were locked away in the computer. The Galactic Council had made it against the law to talk to the humans who lived around the star called Sol. 50 years ago, the Council had decided that humans were too dangerous and violent to be part of galactic society. They had been banned from leaving their solar system and no one was allowed to contact them. Elena's fingers stopped just above the sealed communication controls. She knew that breaking this law would get her in terrible trouble. But as more reports came in about star systems going completely dark and silent, she realized that normal rules no longer mattered. Sometimes when everything was falling apart, you had to do dangerous things to survive. Navigator Finn Torres was sitting at his computer screen across the room, and his face had turned very pale. He called out to Elena in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. The long-distance sensors were showing something huge coming toward their station. It was moving very fast and heading straight for them. The main viewing screen turned on and showed them something that made Elena's blood feel like ice water in her veins. A Drakari harvester ship was coming out of hyperspace, and it was as big as a small moon. The ship's outer shell looked like it was alive and breathing. Long tentacle-like arms made of energy reached out from it like fingers trying to grab something. Elena asked how much time they had before the alien ship would reach them. Torres looked at his instruments and told her they had maybe 6 hours or less. Elena looked around the bridge at her small crew of scientists and researchers. None of them were soldiers or fighters. They had no weapons that could stop a harvester ship and no shields strong enough to protect them from its attack. But they did have one thing that might save the galaxy. Their communication array was powerful enough to send messages all the way to the forbidden solar system where the humans lived. Elena made a decision that she knew would either save everyone or get them all killed. She told Marcus to open a communication channel to Sol and use maximum power to send the signal across all frequencies. Marcus's eyes got very wide and he reminded Elena that if the Galactic Council found out they had contacted the humans, they would be in serious trouble. Elena interrupted him and said there would be no council left to punish them if they didn't try something desperate. The Drakari were only 3 days away from reaching the most important worlds in the galaxy. Every fleet that had been sent to fight them had been completely destroyed or taken over by the aliens. They needed help from someone the Drakari had never fought before. Someone who might have weapons and tactics that the aliens couldn't adapt to. The communication dish on top of their station turned slowly until it was pointing toward a distant point of light. That was the star called Sol. This yellow star was the home of humanity and the place where the most dangerous species in the galaxy lived. Elena activated the emergency beacon that would broadcast on every frequency and could not be ignored by anyone listening. Elena spoke into the microphone with a steady voice even though her hands were shaking. She identified herself as Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Galactic Research Division and announced that Emergency Protocol Omega was now in effect. She explained that the galaxy was facing an enemy that could destroy all life and they desperately needed help from the humans. The signal burst out from their station and raced across space at the speed of light. In the distance, the Drakari harvester ship continued moving toward them, and its living hull pulsed with excited anticipation. Elena could only hope that somewhere in the Sol system someone was listening to their desperate call for help as the first energy tentacles from the harvester began to touch their station's weak defensive shields. Elena wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake in the history of the galaxy. Or maybe she had just found its salvation. The alien ship was getting closer, and their shields were already starting to fail under its probing attacks. Elena watched the communication display and saw that their message was still traveling through space toward the human homeworld. She knew it would take time for the signal to reach them, and even more time for any response to come back. The question was whether they would survive long enough to find out if the humans had received their desperate plea. The station shook as more energy tentacles wrapped around their hull and began trying to break through their defenses. Elena could hear the metal walls creaking and groaning under the pressure. Warning alarms were going off everywhere, and the lights on the bridge were flickering on and off. Marcus was trying to boost power to their shields, but it was clear they would not hold for much longer. Torres was sending out automated distress signals to any ships that might be close enough to help them. But Elena knew that no one would come in time to save them from the harvester. All they could do now was hope that their message would reach the humans and that the legendary Deathworlders would answer their call. The galaxy had spent 50 years calling humans monsters and savages who were too violent for civilized space. Now those same monsters might be the only hope for survival against an enemy that threatened to consume everything. Admiral Jack Morrison stood in the command center of Luna Station with his hands clasped behind his back. He was looking at a big holographic display that showed all of Earth's defensive weapons floating in space around the planet. 50 years of being alone had changed how humans thought about war. They had learned to combine their natural fighting spirit with smart planning in ways that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. Communications. Officer Lisa Park called out to the Admiral from her station. Her voice cut through the steady, humming sounds of the command center. They were getting a message from outside the quarantine zone that surrounded their solar system. The message was coming from something called the Galactic Research Division. Morrison's gray eyes became narrow and focused. The last time they had heard from anyone in the galactic community, it had been an official document telling them they were banished forever. The galaxy had decided that humans were too violent and too unpredictable to be allowed around civilized species. Morrison found it ironic that the same violent nature that made them outcasts might now make them the galaxy's saviors, the Admiral told Lisa to play the message for everyone to hear. Dr. Vasquez's desperate voice filled the command center, asking for help against something called the Drakari. Morrison felt something stirring in his chest. It was not quite satisfaction, but it was close. The same galaxy that had thrown them out was now begging for their help. Captain David Chun, who was Morrison's tactical officer, spoke up from his station. Their deep space monitoring equipment was detecting massive energy readings moving toward the center of the galaxy. Whatever this Drakari threat was, it appeared to be very real and very dangerous. Morrison nodded slowly and asked how long it had been since they had tested their new ship designs in actual combat. Chun replied that the Titan-class dreadnoughts had finished their testing 6 months ago. The Wraith-class stealth ships were ready to be used in battle, and the Hellfire-class destroyers had earned their frightening name during training exercises. Morrison turned to look at the huge viewing screen that covered most of the command center's main wall. In the distance, Earth hung in space like a blue marble, looking peaceful and quiet. But hidden throughout the solar system were the results of 50 years of isolation. Humans had spent those years building weapons and ships designed by a species that had turned fighting into an art form. The Admiral gave the order to signal all fleet commanders and tell them to prepare their ships for battle. They were going to war again. The response was immediate and impressive. Throughout the Sol system, massive shipyards came alive with activity. The Titan-class dreadnoughts were each as big as a city, and they began powering up their fusion reactors. Their hulls were covered with railguns and plasma cannons and weapon systems that would make the galaxy's peacekeeping forces look like children playing with toys. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim reported from the sensor station that the Wraith squadrons were ready for stealth deployment. They were asking for permission to scout ahead and gather information about the enemy. Morrison thought about this carefully. The Wraith-class ships were humanity's answer to reconnaissance missions. They were invisible to most sensors and armed with weapons designed to cripple larger vessels through precise strikes. They would be perfect for learning about this new threat. Morrison gave permission for the Wraith ships to begin scouting, but told them to only observe and gather information. He wanted to know what they were dealing with before committing the main fleet to battle. As the orders went out to the various ships, Morrison could not help but feel a familiar excitement. Humanity had always performed best when facing impossible odds. The galaxy had called them Deathworlders and savages who enjoyed conflict and violence. They were not completely wrong about that assessment. Earth had shaped humanity in a crucible of dangerous predators and natural disasters and constant warfare between different groups. This harsh environment had created a species unlike any other in the galaxy. Chun looked up from his tactical display and reported that they were receiving updated intelligence from the research station. The Drukhari were not just conquering worlds like normal invaders. They were harvesting everything and turning entire planets into extensions of their fleet. This was much worse than a typical war. Morrison's jaw became tight with anger. He had seen enough wars to know that some enemies could not be reasoned with or defeated through normal means. The Drukhari sounded like they fell into that category, which meant humanity would have to do what it did best. They would have to become the monsters the galaxy thought they were. The Admiral ordered the beginning of Phase 1 deployment. He wanted the Hellfire squadrons ready for immediate launch. He also told them to contact the Martian Defense Fleet and request their siege platforms. Those massive weapons were designed to crack open heavily defended positions. As the command center erupted into controlled chaos, Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The galaxy that had rejected humanity was now depending on them for survival. The question was whether 50 years of isolation and military development would be enough to face a threat that had defeated every other species in the galaxy. Morrison looked around at his crew and saw determination in their faces. These were humans who had grown up knowing they were banned from the wider galaxy. They had trained for a war that might never come. Now that war was here, and they were ready to show the galaxy what Deathworlders could really do when they were fighting for survival. The massive human fleet began to move with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Ships that had been hidden throughout the solar system emerged from behind moons and asteroids. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth had produced the most dangerous predators in known space, and Morrison intended to make sure they never forgot the lesson. The Wraith-class stealth ship called Shadow's Edge drifted silently through the scattered pieces of metal and rock that had once been the Kepler colony. Commander Alex Rivera kept his breathing slow and steady as he looked at the destruction. Through the ship's advanced sensors, where 3 million people had lived and worked just a few days before, there was now only twisted metal and strange, organic growths that pulsed with alien life. Sensor operator Nina Walsh whispered in shock as she stared at her display screen. Her voice was barely louder than the ship's whisper-quiet engines. The entire infrastructure of the planet had been consumed and changed into something completely different. Nothing remained of the original human colony. Rivera nodded grimly as he studied the readings. The Drukhari harvester ships were unlike anything in humanity's extensive military databases. They did not just destroy things like normal weapons. Instead, they converted everything they touched and turned the matter of conquered worlds into extensions of their growing fleet. The colony's orbital stations were now pulsing with alien, biomechanical life, and their human designs had been corrupted into something monstrous and unrecognizable. Navigator Tom Bradley reported the range to the main harvester ship. They were 12,000 kilometers away and getting closer to the massive vessel that dominated the center of the star system. He described it as incredible and larger than Luna Station, but also completely alive in ways that defied understanding. Rivera watched through the ship's powerful optical systems as the harvester's surface moved and rippled like skin on a living creature. Massive tentacles reached out from its hull to embrace the planet below in a deadly hug. Through the advanced cameras, he could see the world's surface changing in real time. Cities were being broken down piece by piece and reconstructed into hive-like structures that pulsed with alien purpose and intelligence. Nina suddenly reported that she was detecting smaller vessels separating from the main harvester ship. They were moving in the direction of the Shadow's edge and approaching fast. Rivera's training immediately kicked in and his body tensed for action. The Wraith class was designed for stealth operations, but if they had been detected, their only advantages were speed and superior firepower. He ordered his crew to battle stations and told them to prepare for evasive maneuvers. The approaching vessels were unlike anything in human military experience or training. They moved with the fluid grace of living organisms, and their biomechanical hulls shifted and adapted as they closed the distance. Rivera counted at least 30 of them, and each one was about the size of a human frigate. Nina reported something that filled her voice with disbelief and fear. The alien ships were not showing up on their sensors at all. They could only be seen through visual contact. It was as if they were completely invisible to the sophisticated detection systems that humans had developed over decades of warfare. Rivera felt his pulse quicken as he realized the implications. If the Drakari could hide from human sensors, then the main fleet would be fighting blind when they arrived. He ordered his crew to begin recording everything they saw. The command staff back on Luna Station needed to see this information to understand what they were truly facing. The first Drakari vessel opened fire, and Rivera's world exploded into chaos and violence. The alien weapons were not energy-based, like most galactic civilizations used in their wars. Instead, they were living things that looked like tentacles made of biomechanical horror. These weapons tried to burrow into his ship's hull like parasites seeking a host. Rivera shouted orders for evasive maneuvers as he felt the Shadow's edge shudder under the impact of the alien weapons striking their defensive shields. He ordered his crew to return fire immediately. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and they needed to fight back or die. The Wraith's plasma cannons lit up the darkness of space with brilliant beams of coherent energy that sliced through the first attacking vessel. But instead of exploding like a normal ship, the Drakari vessel began to regenerate itself. Its biomechanical hull started knitting itself back together as if the damage had never happened. Nanya reported in shock that the damage to the alien ship was healing itself. She asked how they were supposed to fight something that could regenerate from any injury. Her professional composure was starting to crack under the stress of facing an impossible enemy. Rivera's mind raced as he searched for a solution. Humanity had faced regenerating enemies before during their long history on Earth. In the brutal ecosystem that had shaped their species, they had learned that the answer was not to wound an enemy. The answer was to overwhelm it with more damage than it could possibly heal. He ordered his weapons officers to target the power sources of the alien ships. They needed to concentrate their fire on whatever was generating the energy signatures that kept these vessels running. The Shadow's edge was designed for hit-and-run tactics, and Rivera pushed the ship to its absolute limits. They darted between the Drakari vessels like a metal shark swimming through a school of alien fish. Their weapons targeted the pulsing nodes that seemed to provide power to biomechanical ships. When concentrated human plasma fire hit these critical nodes, the alien vessels shuddered and died like living creatures whose hearts had been destroyed. Nanya shouted over the sound of straining engines that their new tactics were working. The Drakari ships were vulnerable to concentrated firepower when it was applied to their power sources. But even as they destroyed the smaller vessels, Rivera could see the true horror of their situation unfolding before his eyes. The massive harvester was launching more ships from its hull. Hundreds of them were swarming out like insects from a disturbed nest. The Shadow's edge was fast and well armed, but they were hopelessly outnumbered by an enemy that seemed to have unlimited resources. Rivera ordered Tom to plot a course back to the human fleet at maximum speed. They needed to get this vital intelligence back to Admiral Morrison before it was too late. As the Shadow's Edge fled the system at top speed, Rivera took one last look at the devastation behind them. The Drakari were not just another enemy that could be defeated through normal warfare. They were like a plague that consumed everything in their path and grew stronger with each victory. But they did have a weakness that could be exploited. And humanity was uniquely qualified to take advantage of that weakness through their understanding of overwhelming force. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth had produced the most dangerous and effective predators in known space. The space around Jupiter's moons became filled with controlled chaos as the largest human fleet ever assembled prepared for war. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought called Prometheus and watched through the huge viewing window as ship after ship emerged from hiding places in the gas giant's shadows. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Commander Rachel Torres, who was his new tactical officer, gave him the final count of their forces. 247 vessels of various classes and sizes were now ready for battle. The Martian Defense Fleet had contributed 36 siege platforms designed to crack open heavily defended targets. The Asteroid Belt Mining Consortium had provided their entire security force, which included some of the toughest ships in the solar system. Morrison nodded as his weathered face reflected the cold light of distant stars. 50 years of isolation had completely transformed humanity's approach to warfare and ship design. Where other species built ships for exploration and peaceful defense, humans built them for one single purpose. They built them to win wars no matter what the cost might be. Communications Officer Park announced that they were receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. The Council was demanding to know why humans had mobilized such a large fleet and moved it outside their quarantine zone. Morrison's lips curved into a smile that contained no warmth or humor. He told Park to inform the Council that they were simply responding to a distress call and nothing more. The truth was much more complex than his simple answer suggested. Commander Rivera's reconnaissance data had revealed the full scope of the Drakari threat to galactic civilization. The aliens were not just conquering worlds like normal invaders would do. They were converting the entire galaxy into extensions of their hive mind. Every ship they destroyed and every world they consumed made them stronger and more dangerous. Captain Chun called out from the sensor station that long-range scouts were reporting multiple Drakari harvester fleets converging on the core worlds where the most important civilizations lived. The Galactic Defense Forces were being completely overwhelmed by an enemy they did not understand and could not defeat with conventional tactics. Morrison studied the tactical display that showed the flow of battle across dozens of star systems. His mind processed the information with the efficiency of a computer designed for warfare. The galaxy's peacekeeping forces fought like they were conducting a police action. They were precise and measured and concerned with minimizing casualties on both sides. Against the Drakari, this approach was not just ineffective, it was suicide. Morrison gave the signal for the fleet to move forward. He announced that they were going to demonstrate to the galaxy exactly why humanity had been banned from galactic society in the first place. The human fleet moved with the predatory efficiency of a pack of wolves that had found their prey. The Titan-class dreadnoughts formed the backbone of their formation. These massive ships had hulls that bristled with weapons designed to crack open planets and reduce them to rubble. Around them, the Hellfire-class destroyers darted like angry wasps with their fusion-powered engines, leaving trails of superheated plasma that glowed in the darkness. Navigation Officer Kim reported that they were entering the first contested system where the Drakari had established a presence. The aliens had positioned a full harvester fleet around the third planet and were in the process of consuming everything on its surface. This would be humanity's first real test against the galactic threat. Morrison nodded as he prepared to show the galaxy what Deathworlders could accomplish when they were truly motivated. The alien species they had encountered before during the border wars had been rational and predictable in their behavior. The Drakari were something else entirely. They were a force of nature that had to be met with equal violence and determination. The Admiral ordered all ships to assume battle formation Delta 7, which was a formation designed specifically for fighting overwhelming numbers of enemies. He told the Wraith squadrons to begin their approach and target the communication nodes and power sources of the alien fleet. The battle was about to begin. The fight started not with grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but with humanity's particular brand of calculated brutality. The Wraith-class ships struck first using their advanced stealth systems to penetrate deep into the Drukhari formation without being detected. Their weapons were designed to cripple rather than destroy, and they severed the biomechanical connections that held the alien fleet together. Torres reported that the Drukhari were responding to their attack much faster than projected. The aliens were adapting to human stealth technology with frightening speed. Morrison had expected this reaction. The Drukhari's greatest strength was their ability to adapt and learn from each encounter. But humanity had spent 50 years studying every battle they had ever fought and learning from their mistakes with obsessive dedication. Morrison ordered Phase 2 of their attack plan. The Hellfire squadrons received orders to begin their full attack pattern and show the aliens what Deathworlders could really do when they were fighting for survival. The galaxy was about to receive a lesson in human warfare. The Hellfire-class destroyers erupted from their hiding positions like wolves emerging from a dark forest. Their weapons were not the clean energy beams that galactic civilization favored in their conflicts. Instead, they were crude and brutal, and devastatingly effective against any target they were aimed at. Railguns accelerated depleted uranium slugs to speeds that were significant fractions of the speed of light. Plasma cannons superheated matter to temperatures that could be found in the cores of stars. Missile launchers fired warheads that could turn asteroids into clouds of dust and metal vapor. The Drukhari fleet found itself caught between the precision strikes of the Wraith squadrons and the overwhelming firepower of the Hellfire destroyers. Their biomechanical hulls were designed to regenerate from the typical weapons used by galactic civilizations. But they could not cope with the sheer destructive force that human weapons brought to bear against them. Torres called out with a voice that contained something between awe and horror. The massive Drukhari harvester was trying to retreat from the battle. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the aliens were running away from an enemy instead of adapting to overcome them. Morrison felt a grim satisfaction as he watched the alien retreat. The galaxy had called humanity monsters, and perhaps they were right about that assessment. But sometimes it took monsters to fight monsters. Sometimes civilization needed savages to protect it from things that were even worse than savages. Morrison gave the order for all ships to pursue the retreating enemy. They were going to end this threat once and for all, and show the galaxy that the Deathworlders had returned to save everyone who had rejected them. The final battle raged across 3 star systems as the combined Drukhari fleet made their desperate last stand against the advancing human forces. Admiral Morrison stood in the command center of the Prometheus and watched as humanity's war machine ground forward with the inexorable precision of a glacier made of metal and fire. Communications. Officer Park reported that the Galactic Council fleet was requesting permission to join the battle against the Drukhari. Her voice was tight with the strain of coordinating a galaxy-wide conflict that involved dozens of different species and hundreds of different ship designs. Morrison's eyes never left the tactical display as he denied their request. He told Park that the galactic forces would only get in their way. The truth was much harsher than his simple words suggested to his crew. The galaxy's peacekeeping forces, with their emphasis on minimal casualties and surgical strikes, were worse than useless. Against an enemy like the Drukhari, they were actually a liability because their predictable tactics and humanitarian concerns made them easy targets for an enemy that learned from every single encounter. Commander Torres called out from her station that the Drukhari super harvester was beginning its final transformation. The massive alien construct was consuming the entire 4th planet of the system to fuel its metamorphosis into something even more dangerous. The process was both fascinating and terrifying to watch as an entire world disappeared into the creatures. Biomechanical maw, Morrison nodded grimly as he watched the readings on his display. Intelligence reports had suggested that the Drakari were capable of this kind of sacrifice. They could consume entire worlds to create a single unstoppable vessel. That would be nearly impossible to defeat. The super harvester was already the size of a small moon, and its biomechanical hull pulsed with the absorbed mass and knowledge of 1 billion dead worlds. Sensor operator Walsh reported that energy readings from the super harvester were completely off their charts. Whatever the alien construct was becoming their current weapons might not be able to penetrate its new defenses. The creature was using everything it had learned from their battles to create the perfect weapon against humanity. Morrison studied the energy readings and tactical projections with the cold efficiency of a machine designed for warfare. His mind processed the implications of what they were seeing. The super harvester was adapting and using the accumulated knowledge of every battle and every defeat to create something that could withstand humanity's assault. It was learning and evolving. And becoming the perfect predator, Morrison gave the signal to prepare for Operation Deathworld. The order sent a chill through everyone in the command center who knew what those words meant. Operation Deathworld was humanity's final contingency plan. It was a tactic so brutal and so completely without mercy that it had never been used in actual combat. It was the ultimate expression of humanity's Deathworld origins and their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Torres spoke quietly and asked if he was really sure about this decision. She reminded him that once they began Operation Deathworld, there would be no going back and no way to undo what they were about to do. The consequences would be permanent and irreversible. Morrison looked around the command center at the faces of his crew. Most of them were young people who had been born after humanity's banishment from galactic society. They had grown up in isolation and trained for a war that might never come. Now that war was here, and they were the thin line standing between civilization and complete extinction. The Admiral gave the final order to begin the operation. Across the human fleet, ships began to reveal their true nature. Hulls that had appeared to be heavily armored opened up to show that they were actually hollow inside. They were packed with fusion warheads and antimatter charges that could destroy entire moons. The Hellfire-class destroyers, which had been designed specifically for suicide missions, began their final approach toward the Super-Harvester. But this was not a mindless sacrifice like something from an ancient war. This was calculated and precise and designed to exploit the one weakness that the Drakari could not adapt to overcome. Overwhelming and concentrated force applied at the exact moment of maximum vulnerability was something that could not be learned from or adjusted to. Walsh reported that the Super Harvester was beginning to move toward the core worlds of the galaxy. The massive biomechanical construct was now large enough to be classified as an artificial planet. Its surface was covered with weapon emplacements and defensive systems that had all been adapted from humanity's own designs. It had learned from every battle and absorbed every tactic that had been used against it. Morrison gave the order for all ships to execute their final attack. The human fleet moved with the precision of a predator pack that had been hunting together for years. The Wraith squadrons struck first, using their stealth systems to penetrate the Super Harvester's adapted defenses. But instead of attacking, they deployed special payloads called quantum beacons that would guide the main assault. The Hellfire destroyers came next with their fusion drives pushed far beyond safe operating limits as they accelerated toward the Super Harvester. Each ship had become a guided missile with its crew compartments evacuated, and its hull packed with enough explosive force to crack open a moon and scatter its pieces across space. Torres reported that the Drakari were adapting to their attack pattern faster than expected. The aliens were targeting the guidance systems that controlled the human missiles and trying to disrupt their approach. Morrison nodded because he had expected this response. The Drakari's greatest strength was their ability to learn and adapt, and overcome any strategy through sheer evolutionary pressure, but humanity had one advantage that the Drakari could not replicate or learn to counter. Humans had the ability to sacrifice everything for victory when the situation demanded it. They could make choices that no rational species would ever make and follow through with actions that defied all logic except the logic of survival. Morrison ordered the Titan dreadnoughts to focus full power to their main guns and target the quantum beacons that had been planted by the Wraith squadrons. The massive weapons of the Titan-class ships had been designed to destroy planets and reduce them to asteroid fields. Now they focused their incredible firepower on the quantum beacons. The quantum resonance created by the beacons amplified the dreadnoughts' firepower in ways that the Drukhari could not predict or adapt to. The amplified energy created focused points of destruction that burned through the super harvester's adaptive defenses like hot knives cutting through soft butter. Walsh shouted with excitement that their plan was working. The super harvester's massive hull was beginning to destabilize under the quantum feedback. The alien construct was losing structural integrity as its own adaptive systems turned against it. Morrison watched as the massive, biomechanical construct began to tear itself apart from the inside. Its adaptive systems, which had been designed to counter any threat, were being overloaded by the quantum feedback loops. The very intelligence that made it so dangerous was now becoming its greatest weakness. Morrison ordered all ships to withdraw to a safe distance and prepare for total structural collapse. The super harvester's death throes lit up the void like a dying star that was collapsing in on itself. Its biomechanical hull, which had been unable to adapt to the quantum cascade, began to consume itself. The absorption process that had made it so powerful was now working in reverse and breaking down the accumulated mass of 1,000 conquered worlds. Torres reported that long-range sensors were detecting the collapse of all remaining Drukhari fleets throughout the galaxy. Without the super harvester's coordination and central intelligence, they were losing cohesion and falling apart like a machine whose central processor had been destroyed. Morrison nodded slowly as he realized that the battle was finally over. But he also knew that the war's consequences were just beginning to unfold. Humanity had proven itself capable of defeating a galactic threat that had overwhelmed every other species. But they had done so by revealing the true extent of their military capabilities and showing the galaxy exactly why they had been banished in the first place. Morrison ordered Park to signal the Galactic Council and tell them that the threat had been eliminated. The galaxy was safe from the Drukhari and could return to its peaceful existence. As the human fleet began its long journey back to the Sol system, Morrison could not help but wonder what the future would hold for his species. Humanity had saved the galaxy by being exactly what the galaxy feared most. They had been ruthless and efficient and utterly without mercy when their survival was threatened. The Deathworlders had answered the desperate call for help, and the galaxy would never be the same again.